My name is Maya Collins. I was 26 years old the night my aunt grabbed my portfolio, 4 years of work. Every logo, every brand, concept, every late-night revision, and dropped it into the fireplace like it was junk mail. The flames took it in under a minute. I stood there in my uncle's living room in Nashville, Tennessee, smelling the smoke, while 12 members of my family sat in silence and watched. Not one of them moved. Not one of them said stop. That was 6 years ago. Last spring, I walked into that same living room, same fireplace, same leather sectional, same oil painting of my uncle's hunting dog above the mantel, and I brought something with me that changed everything. But before I tell you what that was, you need to understand where it started. My father died when I was 9. A construction accident, quick, no warning. My mother had left when I was 4, moved somewhere west, and never looked back. So, my father's older brother, Uncle Ray Collins, took me in. He was 42, already had 3 kids of his own, and he made sure I knew, not with cruelty exactly, but with consistency, that I was an addition, not a priority. The Collins house in Brentwood, a suburb south of Nashville, was the kind of house that made statements. 5 bedrooms, heated driveway, a basement with a home theater and a pool table nobody used. My uncle had made his money in commercial real estate, and he carried that success the way some men carry a weapon, always visible, always slightly aimed at someone. Every room in that house told you who mattered. Plaques on the wall for his business awards. Team photos from my cousin Derek's baseball championships. A framed newspaper clipping from when Derek made the Tennessee Academic All-Star list his junior year. I'd lived in that house for 9 years by then. I had exactly 1 photograph in a frame anywhere in that home, and it sat on my nightstand in my bedroom, not hung on any wall, not displayed for anyone. Me and my dad, at a water park, both of us laughing so hard our eyes were shut. It was the only copy I had. Derek was 2 years younger than me, which is only relevant because it meant that no matter what I did, he had more time to outshine it. He was smart in the way that gets noticed early, quick with numbers, articulate in that particular Southern way that impresses adults, and he had his father's jaw and his father's handshake. By 16, he was being positioned as the family's future. By 18, he had a 4.1 gigapascals, a spot on the debate team, and a father who introduced him at every business dinner in Nashville as the next great thing. I was studying graphic design at the community college across town. That decision, made without consulting my uncle, produced a reaction I still remember with precision. "You're going to school to make pretty pictures?" he said at dinner one evening. "That's what you're doing with the roof I put over your head?" I explained that graphic design was a real career, that companies paid real money for branding, that I had a plan. He listened with the expression people wear when they're being polite enough to let you finish before dismissing you. Then he picked up his fork and said, "Derek, tell everyone about the LSAT prep course." My Aunt Sandra was a woman who had organized her entire identity around her son's achievements. She wore his accomplishments like jewelry. Every conversation eventually circled back to him. She was not unkind the way cruel people are unkind. She was unkind the way mirrors are unkind. She only reflected what she'd already decided was worth seeing. The one person in that family who saw me was my grandmother, Ida Collins, my father's mother, which made her my uncle's mother too, though they had a complicated relationship I never fully understood. She was 73 when I came to live with Ray, small and sharp-eyed with hands that were always warm. She had been a seamstress for 40 years. She made costumes for the Nashville theater scene and wedding dresses for women who couldn't afford boutique prices. She was never rich, but she was precise, and she was proud of her craft in a way that made me feel that being good at something quiet and careful was worth something. She came to dinner once a month. Those were the only dinners where my work got mentioned without a side of condescension. She'd ask to see my projects. She'd hold a logo I'd designed and turn it slowly, studying it the way she studied a seam. "This one breathes," she'd say sometimes. She meant it had room in it. It wasn't cluttered or desperate. She died the spring I turned 24. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to end. I sat with her in the hospital more than anyone else did. My uncle came twice. Sandra came once, brought flowers, and left within the hour. What I didn't know until 3 months after the funeral was that my grandmother had a will. And in that will, she'd left me $40,000 in an irrevocable trust, specifically for my education and professional development, managed by an independent firm in Franklin. I couldn't use it for anything else. I couldn't give it away. But for my work, it was entirely mine. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Not just because of the money, because of what the money meant. She had seen what I was trying to build. She had decided it was worth protecting. I didn't tell my uncle right away. Looking back, that was wise, even if it wasn't intentional. The call came 8 months later. Sunday in November. My uncle had gathered the family for what he called a conversation about planning. That was how he announced decisions he'd already made. He didn't tell you things. He called them conversations, and then he explained what was going to happen. The dining room looked exactly as always. Long mahogany table, 8 chairs, the chandelier that was slightly too large for the space. Derek sat to his father's right, as always. Sandra sat across from me. My uncle's 2 daughters from his first marriage occupied the far end and mostly stared at their phones. My uncle opened by praising Derek. He had applied to Duke Law School. He had been accepted. He had a plan to become a corporate attorney, to come back to Nashville and eventually take over the Collins real estate holdings. It was, my uncle said, exactly the kind of future the family had been building toward. And then, the thing about law school, he said, is the cost. Duke is not cheap. First year alone runs close to $60,000. He looked at me across the table. Maya, I know your grandmother left you some money. The air shifted. I know it was meant for your design work, he continued. But I want you to think about priorities here. Derek's future, this family's future, is something that matters for all of us. What you're doing, the freelance logos, it's sweet, it's creative, but it's not the same kind of opportunity. Sandra leaned forward. She was wearing a cream blazer, her dark hair pinned back, her expression the practiced version of reasonableness. Honey, we're not asking you to give up your dreams. We're asking you to pause them. Derek can pay you back once he's established. This is family. Doesn't that mean something? I said, very carefully. That money is in a trust. I can't use it for someone else's law school. It's legally restricted. Sandra's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. You could apply some of it toward design courses and free up the rest. Ray could match what we're short on. We're talking about family here, Maya. It means something, I said. That's why I'm not doing this. The silence that followed was the kind that families produce when someone declines to perform. Not shocked silence, punishing silence. Then Sandra stood up. She walked around the table toward me, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and she reached across and picked up my portfolio. I'd brought it to dinner that evening, specifically to show recent client work, something I'd been proud of, and she carried it to the fireplace. She set it inside on the grate. She picked up the long matchstick from the mantel. She lit it. Nobody moved. I watched 4 years of work catch and burn. Derek looked at the fireplace and then at his hands. My uncle watched me with the expression of a man waiting for compliance. The fire was small at first, then less small. The plastic binding melted before the pages did. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I stood completely still and I watched it. And when it was done, I turned to look at my uncle and I said, quietly, I hope it was worth it. I walked out. No one followed. Before I tell you what happened in the years after, I want to pause here. If you've ever had your work dismissed by someone who was supposed to believe in you, who was supposed to be the person in your corner, drop something in the comments. I spent years thinking I was too sensitive about what happened that night. I wasn't. And if you want to know how this ends, stay with me. What came next is something I'm still not entirely sure I could have planned. I want to be honest about those years because they were not a clean arc. They were not a highlight reel. They were Tuesday mornings when a client ghosted me after 3 rounds of revisions. They were nights I calculated whether I could afford both groceries and software licenses, and chose the software because the software was the work. I left my uncle's house the week after the fireplace. I moved into a studio apartment in East Nashville with a mattress on the floor and a folding table I used as a desk. The trust from my grandmother covered my enrollment in a professional branding program, the software I needed, and 6 months of rent while I built my first real client base. It wasn't generous. It was exactly enough, which I've come to think was intentional. She didn't want to rescue me. She wanted to give me a foundation, and then make me build on it. My first real clients were small: a food truck owner who needed a logo, a yoga studio downtown, a woman starting a children's clothing line out of her garage. I charged less than I should have. I worked faster than I was comfortable with. I made mistakes, corrected them, and made new ones. But I was learning the thing no design program actually teaches, that the work is only half of it. The other half is understanding what someone needs before they know how to say it. I heard about Derek through Renee, my uncle's youngest daughter, who was the only Collins I still spoke to regularly. She texted me one afternoon with no preamble. "Derek dropped out of Duke. Dad's telling people it's a leave of absence." I put down my phone and sat with that for a long moment. I want to be honest, I didn't feel happy. I felt something more complicated. The particular ache of watching someone fall when you'd been told their rising would justify everything. Derek had not been given cruelty as a gift. He'd been given certainty. And certainty, it turns out, is not the same as capability. Nobody ever made him practice struggling. So when the struggle came, and it always comes, at Duke Law School just as anywhere else, he had no tools for it. He had only ever been told he was exceptional. He had never been taught what to do when exceptional wasn't enough. That's not his fault entirely. That's what happens when a family mistakes talent for preparation. There was more over the years. Derek enrolled in a business program. Left that too. A startup my uncle funded collapsed in under 2 years. Sandra's marriage had gone quiet, according to Renee. My uncle had sold the Brentwood house and moved to something smaller. I didn't celebrate any of it. But I also didn't carry guilt for having left. Meanwhile, something was building. The moment it changed didn't look dramatic at the time. It looked like an ordinary email on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. A mid-sized consumer brand, you'd recognize the product if I named it, had found my portfolio through a contact I'd met at a conference in Austin. They needed a full rebrand. New logo, new color system, new packaging direction. Comprehensive brand guidelines. It was the largest project I'd ever been offered. It required me to bring in 2 other designers, rent actual studio space, and stop pretending I was a solo freelancer with a folding table. I called Renee. She said, "Maya, take it." I took it. That project took 8 months and changed the trajectory of everything. The brand launched in Target stores nationally. The packaging was featured in a design publication. I started getting calls I hadn't solicited. 2 years later, I incorporated Collins Creative Group. I kept the last name. And I want to be clear about why. Not for my uncle. Not for any of them. For my father and for my grandmother, who had both carried that name with more integrity than Ray Collins ever gave them credit for. The year I turned 31, the company cleared its first 7 figures. 31 employees. An office in the Gulch neighborhood downtown. Clients in 6 states. I still drove the same Honda Civic I'd bought for $2,000 when I moved out. I kept it as a reminder of what the work had actually cost. The invitation came on a Friday afternoon. Cream cardstock, my uncle's return address embossed in the corner. A family reunion, the first one in 6 years, at his new property in Murfreesboro. I read it once, put it on the counter, and didn't look at it again for 4 days. Then Renee called. "His heart," she said. "The doctors are serious. I think he wants everyone together while he still can. You know how he is, he won't say it out loud." I told her I'd think about it. That same evening, Derek called. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. His voice was different, quieter, less certain of itself. He said he understood if I didn't want to come. Then he said, "What happened with your portfolio? That wasn't right." I should have said something. I said, "Yes, you should have." He had nothing to add to that. We stayed on the line a few seconds, and then he said he hoped I'd come. I almost didn't. But there was something I needed to do. Something I'd been thinking about for 2 years. Ever since Renee told me something that made me put down my coffee and stare out the window for a long time. Sandra was struggling. The marriage had not just gone quiet, it had ended. Her husband had left and taken most of what they'd shared. She was living in an apartment in Smyrna, working part-time retail, no health insurance, no savings that were fully hers. Renee had found out because Sandra had asked to borrow money, which Sandra would never have done if she had any other option. The woman who had lit the match was working a register and borrowing from her niece. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly. I felt tired and sad, and something else. I didn't have a clean word for the feeling of watching a person become the consequence of their own choices and finding that it looks nothing like you imagined it would. There was no satisfaction in it. There was only the weight of time and what it does to people. I made a phone call the week before the reunion. Then I made arrangements. I drove myself to Murfreesboro, no statement entrance. Just my old Civic on the interstate with the windows down and a coffee in the cup holder, the same drive I'd made 100 times when I was young and didn't yet know what I was heading toward. My uncle's new property was smaller than I expected. A 4-bedroom colonial on a regular lot. Well-maintained but modest compared to Brentwood. The lawn was tidy. There was a flag by the front door. Some things don't change. About 20 family members were scattered across the backyard when I arrived. Renee found me immediately, looped her arm through mine, walked with me toward the back. "You look good," she said. "You look like you finally slept." I spotted Derek near the porch. He was thinner than I remembered, wearing a button-down that didn't quite fit, talking to a cousin with the careful energy of someone who knows people are checking on him. He saw me and nodded once. I nodded back. My uncle was in a lawn chair near the garden, an oxygen tank beside him, a knit blanket across his knees despite the warmth. He was 70 now, and he looked it. When he saw me, something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there before. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man confronting the distance between what he'd built and what he'd broken. "Uncle Ray," I said. "Maya," he said. We looked at each other for a moment. He didn't stand. I didn't offer my hand. "You came," he said. "I came." He looked at his hands. "I heard you've done well." "I have." He nodded slowly. "Your grandmother always said you had something." I let that sit without responding. It was Sandra who changed the temperature of the afternoon. A rideshare pulled up along the side of the house, not a hired car, which I'd arranged deliberately, because Sandra would not have accepted being driven in anything that looked like charity. I'd called her directly the week before. I'd told her I wanted to speak with her. I had not told her about what. She came around the corner of the house, and the backyard went quiet in the particular way backyards go quiet when everyone is pretending not to look. Sandra was 57 now. Her dark hair was fully gray at the temples. She was wearing what I recognized as her nice clothes, which is different from nice clothes, the outfit you save for occasions that matter, pressed and careful, a little worn at the cuffs. She held her purse in front of her with both hands. She saw me and stopped. The last time we'd been in the same room, she'd lit a match. "Maya," she said. Her voice was thin as paper. "Sandra." She looked at the relatives arranged across the yard, all of them cataloging her arrival, and I watched her understand that her situation was no longer a secret she was managing, that people knew, that she had come here stripped of the armor she'd worn for 30 years. She looked at the ground. "I don't know why you asked me here." I waited until she raised her eyes to mine. "Because I have something for you," I said. I opened the canvas bag I'd brought in, nothing impressive, just a bag, and I took out a folder. Clean white cardstock with a small embossed seal on the front. The Ida Mae Collins Fund. I'd registered it as a non-profit 6 months earlier. Named for my grandmother. Funded with the first significant check I'd written that wasn't for payroll, or the office, or the work. $60,000 in initial funding. The purpose: professional retraining and transitional support for women rebuilding after financial disruption, divorce, job loss, or family estrangement. 12 weeks of accredited bookkeeping certification, housing assistance during training, job placement support at the end. The whole backyard was listening. I didn't lower my voice. "Sandra," I said, "I want to offer you a place in this program. It's fully funded. 12 weeks, full certification, and we work with local firms for placement. It's yours if you want it." Her face moved through something complicated and private. She looked at the folder the way people look at things they aren't sure they deserve. She stopped. "After what I did to you." I held the folder out. "What you did to me can't be undone. I know that. I've sat with it for 6 years. She looked up at me. But my grandmother believed that the people who hurt you most are sometimes just people who had less than they needed and didn't know another way. I don't know if that's true in every case. I think it's true in enough of them that it's worth acting like it might be. The yard was completely still. This isn't about forgiveness, I continued. It's about who I decided to be. That has nothing to do with you. Sandra took the folder. Her hands were shaking. Tears ran down her face, and she didn't wipe them. I'm sorry, she whispered. Maya, I am so sorry. I looked at her, the woman she had become, the ruins of the certainty she'd once carried, and I said, don't waste it. Derek had moved closer while all of this was happening. I turned and found him standing about 10 feet away, hands in his pockets. I walked toward him. I want to say something to you, I said quietly. And I need you to hear it as what it is, not as an attack. He nodded. You are not a failure because you left Duke. You're not a failure because the startup collapsed. He started to speak, and I held up one hand, gently. You were raised to believe that being smart was enough. That talent was a destination, rather than a starting point. Nobody ever required you to struggle because they thought you were above it. So when the struggle came, and it always comes, you had no tools. That is not entirely your fault. But it is your responsibility now. He stared at the grass. His jaw was tight. The fund has a career transition track, I said. It's structured. 12 weeks. Mentorship, placement support. The only requirement is showing up and doing the work like everyone else in the room. The offer stands if you ever want it. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said very quietly, thank you, Maya. That was enough. My uncle called my name from his chair. I walked over and stood in front of him. He looked at me for a long moment. This man who had taken me in at 9 years old and never quite figured out what to do with me, who had watched his sister-in-law light a match and said nothing. Your daddy would be proud, he said. His voice cracked slightly at the end. I thought about my father at the water park. Both of us with our eyes shut, laughing. He would have been proud already, I said. He didn't need to wait. My uncle nodded. He looked at his hands. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to, and I didn't need him to. But he looked at his hands for a long time, and sometimes that is its own kind of reckoning. I need to tell you about my grandmother's letter, because it wasn't only the money she left me. Her lawyer had mentioned, when he called me that Tuesday in the parking lot 6 years ago, that she'd included a handwritten note with the trust documents. I'd filed it in the same box where I kept my father's photograph, and I'd told myself I'd read it when I was ready. I wasn't ready for 4 years. I read it the night before I drove to Murfreesboro. It was 2 paragraphs on one side of a note card, in her careful seamstress cursive. My dear Maya, it began, you are the most precise person I have ever loved. You notice things that other people walk past. That is your gift, and it is also your burden, because it means you will see very clearly when people choose not to see you. The second paragraph. I have left you what I can. It is not much, but it is what I earned with my own hands, and it is clean. Use it for the work. Not because the work will make you rich, but because the work is how you tell the truth. And the truth is this: you are exactly enough. You always were. Don't let them convince you otherwise. I sat on my kitchen floor and read it 3 times. Then I got up, made coffee, and drove to Murfreesboro in the morning. Let me tell you what happened after. Sandra completed the certification program. She graduated 3rd in her cohort on a Thursday in March. Turns out that when you strip away the performance of a life built around someone else's identity, there is a capable person underneath. She works now for a small nonprofit in Nashville. Stable hours, decent salary, health insurance. She sends a card to the fund every year on the anniversary of my grandmother's passing. Not to me personally, addressed to the fund. A small donation and a note that says, each time in slightly different words. Passing it forward. It took me too long. Derek contacted the fund almost a year after the reunion. He enrolled in the career transition track and completed it without missing a single session. He's in project management now for a commercial construction company in Memphis. He called me once to say so. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long to accept something I'd offered openly. I told him I was glad he got there. My uncle is in a managed care facility in Franklin now. Renee visits regularly. I sent a card on his last birthday. He called to thank me, the first call he had ever initiated to me in my life. We talked for 12 minutes. He asked about the business. I told him about a campaign we'd just finished. He said it sounded like real work. I said it was. Collins Creative Group finished its 4th year this past January. 31 employees, clients in 9 states. We just completed a brand identity for a clean energy startup that was picked up by 3 national publications. We're growing, and I'm proud of every part of it. But that's not the part I want you to carry with you. My grandmother never saw any of it. She died before I had a single real client, before I had anything, except a community college enrollment and a folding table, and the willingness to stay awake until 2 in the morning getting better at something I loved. She didn't wait for evidence. She decided I was worth protecting, and she built that decision into a legal document, and she wrote me a letter she knew I wouldn't be ready for until years after she was gone. Some people give you money. Some people give you their time. The rarest people give you belief before you've earned it, which is the only kind that truly matters, because by the time you've earned it, you've usually stopped needing it. My office has one piece of art on the wall behind my desk. Not framed press coverage, not the award we received last year. It's a photograph, the same one I've carried since I was 9 years old. Me and my dad at a water park, both of us laughing so hard our eyes are closed. Under it, on a small card in my grandmother's handwriting, "You are exactly enough." I put it there not for me. I put it there so that every person who walks into that office and sits across from me sees it first. Here is what I've learned in 6 years of building something from a folding table and a fire that took everything I'd made. You cannot control what people choose to see when they look at you. You cannot make them recognize your value before they're ready, and some of them will never be ready, and that is their loss to carry, not yours. What you can control is what you build while they're looking away. Some families are made of blood, some are made of choice. The ones you choose will almost always treat your work like it matters because they chose you back, which means they already know what you're worth. My name is Maya Collins. 6 years ago, I watched everything I had made turn to ash in someone else's fireplace. Last week, I signed a lease on a second office. Build the table first, the rest follows.